Hello, my name is Clarence Edward Stricker. I live at 12100 Reed Hartman Highway, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45241. My date of birth was December 21, 1922. I served in the U.S. Army Air Force, the 5th Air Force. December 21, 1922, in a house at 7th and Isabella Streets in Newport, Kentucky. Newport was a city of about 30,000 people. We were across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. Many of the people in Newport worked in Cincinnati, and my dad was one of them. My parents named me Clarence Edward Stricker Jr. Let me write about my parents. My dad was born in Newport in 1892. Among other jobs, he worked as a driver of a mule team. When our country became involved in World War I, he enlisted in the Marines. And after training at Paris Island, he was sent to France with the 2nd Division. In his third battle, while firing his rifle, he was shot in the left arm. The bullet entered the inside of his left arm and came out by the elbow. He was sent back to USA and was in the hospital in Philadelphia for several months. When he was released from the hospital, he returned to Newport. Let me now write a little about my mother. She was born on a very cold day on December the 31st, 1898 in Effingham, Illinois. She was baptized in St. John's Lutheran Church. Her name was Frida Alvina Sturzen. In school, she was taught in German and later English. During the war years, she worked in a factory and later in a grocery store. She had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. My dad had 4 brothers and 1 sister. I will now tell you how they met. Since my dad was wounded, the government sent him to photography school in Effingham. He would go into the grocery store where my mother worked and became interested in her. They dated for almost a year, and he asked her to marry him. They were married in Effingham, and when he graduated, they headed back to Newport. He became a photographer for a company in Cincinnati named Young and Carl. Getting back to my early years, I had a brother born October 6, 1924, and he was named Robert LaFollette Stricker. We got into trouble like most kids. One bad thing we did, we turned in a false alarm to the fire department. Our parents never found out about that one. I can still remember my first day of school. You see, in those days, the starting of school was either September or February. Since I was born in December, I started in February. There was snow on the ground, and I rode a sled. My mother pulled the sled. My teacher's name was Miss Tobin. I liked her. The name of the school was Arnold School, and only went 1 year because we moved to a different location. And we enrolled me in 9th Street School. After 3 years, we moved again, and I went to 10th Street School. The school only had grades 1 to 5, and one thing I remember while going to 10th Street School was we had a tamed pigeon named Willie. Dad raised him when his mother froze, and Dad fed him with an eyedropper, and Willie thought Dad was his mother. Dad would go driving in our car, and Willie would stand on his shoulder. One day, Willie followed me to school and stood on our windowsill. The teacher, Miss Cobbs, saw him and called our attention to him. I looked out and said out loud, "That's Willie." I got him to come in and showed off for everyone. I was popular that day. I also got to take Willie home, and I took my time. After I graduated from the fifth grade, I was back at 9th Street School. Before I forgot to mention, we had a sister named Rosemary and a brother named Raymond and another named Jerry. I stayed at 9th Street School for 6th and 7th grades, and then went to Newport High School for 8th grade and the 4 years of high school. The year I went to the 8th grade was the last year Newport High taught the 8th grade. During those years, I was deeply involved with my sports. I played football and basketball and followed the Cincinnati Reds baseball team. In 1940, with the talk of World War II, I left school and went to the printing department of a large department store, Maybelline Crew in Cincinnati. I was working on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, when the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor. I left work right away, and it took me 1 hour to get home. I stopped in the Corner Saloon, and my dad was there, and about 50 other fellows playing cards and shooting the breeze. And I found out no one had heard about the bombing. The bartender turned the radio on then, and they all heard. It kind of broke up the card games. I caused quite a stir at work the next day by telling them I was going to enlist in the Marine Corps. I went to enlist, but I was told I had to get one of my parents to sign for me. I was only 17 at the time. That night when my dad got home from work, I asked him to sign for me, and to my surprise, he said, "No, I have plenty of time to get in." I couldn't believe it. All through the years, he always talked about the Marines. I felt a little funny. Next day at work, when I had to tell everyone that my dad would not sign for me. The next 2 years went pretty fast. I bowled with the company team, and it was fun. I had a few dates, nothing serious. I noticed that everything seemed to be rationed. I was able to get a pair of silk hose I took home, and I don't know which my sister, she
Okay.
I was able to get a pair of hose from work and took them home. I don't remember if my sister or my mother got them. I did travel to Effingham by train to visit my cousins and my aunts in summer of 1943. I knew I would be drafted soon. My dad still said no to joining the Marines. We heard about all the casualties the Marines were suffering. So I decided I would not enlist. My brother did enlist in the Army Air Corps in the summer of 1943. They told him it would be a few months before he would be called up. I got my draft notice in December to report into December, and lo and behold, my brother did get his notice to report about the same day. We were at the same Fort Thomas Army Armory in Kentucky we were together for about 7 days, and then got shipped out, and I followed a few days later. While we were still out at Fort Thomas together, the family and friends decided to give us a going away party, and they held it at the Corner Saloon. Loretta Becker, her mother, father, and her boyfriend were sitting in the part where the party was being held. Her dad was checking out the saloon. He wanted to buy it, and later he did. Let me tell you a little bit about Loretta. In those days, she was to become in later days, she was to become my wife. She was in my brother Bob's class in high school, and I was in one of her class. Two. I didn't even notice her. I could say more, but it would not be safe for me. She has told the story many times, and it goes something like this. Loretta says, I didn't know those two were brothers. The one was in several of my classes, and I liked him. The other one I can't stand. That was me. So what happened? We get married 3 years later. When I shipped out, it was the night of January 7th. The train came to us. Really, it was parked on Saratoga Street, and we boarded. We were headed to St. Louis, Jefferson Barracks, before for basic training. We arrived about 8 p.m. and were marched to our huts. The huts held 5 soldiers and were on stilts with a potbelly stove in the middle. Another soldier from California was being told to get in this particular hut that I was. The first thing we heard as we entered was, "You ain't gonna like it here." The hut was dark as the ace of spades, but we managed to get in our bunks. After talking to everyone, I managed to get to sleep. The next morning, the other fellows thought I was the one from California and the other guy from Kentucky. He was a real hillbilly. I'm going to have to take another. After about 17 days of basic training, I did everything but fire the rifle. I was put on KP from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. When I finished the second day, I was so sick I could hardly get to my hut. I did not want to complain. I did not want the other guys to think I couldn't take it. We had dental work checkups the next morning, and when I finally got in the dentist chair, I was really sick. The dentist said, "You are really warm," and asked if there was a thermometer in the tent. They found one and took my temperature. I had 103 degrees, and they sent me to the hospital. I walked, and I did feel real sick. I did not know where I was going, but I found it. They took x-rays and found that I had pneumonia. They put me in a clean, soft bed. The nurse came around with a cart filled with goodies and gave all the patients a shot glass of mineral oil or magnesia every night before lights out. I took mineral oil. After the second day, I felt great and wanted to get back with my buddies. But they told me I had to stay in the hospital at least 20 days. All my buddies shipped out. After I was released from the hospital, it didn't take long before I got my notice that I was going to California for more basic training because I had not fired the rifle. We were taken to a place called Squaw Valley, up in the mountains. We had 26 fellows in our group, and we were called Group 26. We had 3 sergeants, 2 captains, and 1 major. The rest were privates in our group. The man that was like God to us was a PFC, meanest person I had ever met. He made sure life was miserable for us. Conditions were terrible. Our only toilet facility was a large hole in the ground with a burlap sack wrapped around. The hole was slippery, and one of the privates who was coming off guard duty to relieve himself went to the hole. He slipped and went into the hole. Our tent was not far away from the hole, and we heard him yelling. We got out of bed and saw him in the hole. What a mess. And did he smell? Water was racing, and we got out of bed, saw him in the hole. What a mess. Did he smell? Water was racing and locked by a key. And the first sergeant was the only one that had a key. We couldn't find him at first. We pulled the fellow out of the hole, and he just sat on the ground. I think he was crying. Finally, the sergeant showed up, and we were able to get the boy in the shower. I believe today I can still smell him. After we fired the rifle, amongst other things, in 21 days, I was sent to San Francisco. I joined the company that was being formed, the 914 Engineers. We had 213 men in the company, made up mostly from San Francisco area. After a while, we moved to Oroville, California, where we were trained to be soldiers. After about 4 months, we moved to Redding, California, for further training. I remember after waiting 4 hours for our train to pull into the station, and the conductor got out and announced there was no room on the train. I never before pleaded like I did at that time. I told the conductor that when I got back from my furlough, that I was being sent overseas. I guess he felt sorry for me because he told me, I will let you in on the train, but you have to stand all the way to Chicago. Yeah.
Okay.
Our tent was not far away from the hole, and we heard him yelling. We got out of bed and saw him in the hole. What a mess. And did he smell? Water was rationed, and the door was locked by our first sergeant, who was the only one with a key. We pulled the fellow out of the hole, and he just sat on the ground. I think he was crying. Finally, the sergeant showed up, and we were able to get the boy in the shower. I believe today I can still smell him. After we fired the rifle, amongst other things, we graduated in 21 days. I was sent to San Francisco and joined the company being formed, the 914th Engineers. We had 213 men. Did I read this before?
You're good. You're almost
We had 213 men, and the company made up mostly from San Francisco. After a while, we moved to Oroville, California, and we were trained by soldiers. After about 4 months, we moved to Redding, California for further training. I remember after waiting for 4 hours for the train, they pulled into the station. And the conductor got out and announced that there was no room on the train. I never before pleaded like I did. I told the conductor that when I got back my furlough, I was being sent overseas. I guess he felt sorry for me because he told me, I will let you on, but you have to stand all the way to Chicago, which I did. I arrived in Cincinnati on Sunday morning, September 15th, 1943. Later that morning, one of my buddies, Wally Callahan, he had a physical problem and was 4F, not able to serve. I stopped at the house, and later we went for a ride. Close to the corner saloon, we noticed 2 women walking. And Wally said, the one girl is the girl I told you about. The other is her mother. They probably are going to the saloon which her dad had bought. In about 2 hours, we stopped at the saloon, and Wally introduced us. It was Loretta and her mother. I guess I was love at first sight. Loretta and I spent 7 evenings together. She worked during the day, and I remember her shoving me out her house at night. She needed her beauty sleep. On September 21, the day the time changed, and I got to stay 1 hour longer. Her mother, Dad, my mother, and Loretta drove me to the train station in Cincinnati. When I got back to camp, there were rumors that we were going to go overseas. We guessed right. We could go to New York. We were wrong. After about 6 weeks, we got on a troop train and headed to the state of Washington. It was the first of November, and the weather was starting to get cold. We were stationed in Tacoma, Washington. I forgot to mention that I broke my wrist while playing football for the company team. It was the second last game. They put a cast on, and I played the last game with a broken wrist. I climbed a 7-story gangplank to get on to New Amsterdam that took us to Australia. Before I go any further, I would like to tell you a little more about my family. We were poor like most people then, but my dad always had a job, worked for Young and Carl, portrait photographer in Cincinnati. Dad also received a pension from the government. He was wounded in the arm during World War I. My mother was raised Missouri Synod Lutheran and my dad Catholic, but he did not go to church. My young years, we went to a Lutheran church in Cincinnati. We had to ride a streetcar to Cincinnati and then walk about a mile to church. When I was 11 years old, a Bethany Lutheran church was started in Covington, and I was the first Sunday school child. Reverend Victor Sully was the pastor. The church was not in our city, but it was in our state of Kentucky. We had to ride 2 streetcars to get there, and I was in the first confirmation class in 1937. I did not graduate from Newport High, but I got my diploma in the year 2000 when I was 17 years old. My sister Rosemary did not graduate either. Ray and Jerry did. Jerry went on and graduated from the University of Kentucky. Bob did graduate from Newport High before he went into the Air Force. The 1937 flood was very bad for us. I will tell you a little bit what happened. We lived at 7th and Liberty. The water was rising. The water was rising. Would never reach our house. I thought it would never reach our house. My dad was state commander of the VFW, and on the Saturday before, he was helping some of the local VFW members move. He said that he would move us on Sunday. The water was really rising, and we went to stay with some friends. But Dad said he would stay at the house. Next morning, after I got up, I walked down to our house and just stood there and wondered if my dad was okay. The following, I noticed a fellow in a rowboat and saw that it was Fred Doris, a friend of my dad. I yelled and told Dad is still in the house. He rowed over, picked me up, and we went to the house. Our front door was at the top of the 5 steps, and I reached and opened the front door. I yelled for Dad, and he answered. He was sitting on our bed with his feet on the bed. I noticed his house slippers were floating in the water. We got him in the boat, and I saw our wooden rocking chair that my grandmother rocked me with. That is all we got out of the house. We lost everything. We had rocking chair that my grandmother rocked me with, but that is all we got out of the house. We lost everything. We had the rocking chair in our home until we moved to Florida, and I gave it to our granddaughter, Melissa. Back to the Army days. We landed in Sydney and stayed about 2 months. We then took a ride to Brisbane. Got some training, boarded a Dutch merchant ship and headed to New Guinea and landed at Leyte, hot and rainy. We pitched our tents and we formed a patrol and scouted the area. All we found was black natives who were half-dressed. No Japs. We found out that MacArthur had bypassed the Japs who had control of southern New Guinea and Leyte, and was in the central part of the country. After several months, we left by LST landing ship transport for Hollandia and New Guinea, in the northern part of New Guinea. Again, we found no Japs. Very hot weather. We were ordered to pack up and keep our rifles handy. And we were getting closer to Japan. Ayashima was the name of the island. It was a coral reef island, and we had a hard time digging our foxholes. But we managed, and I'm glad we did. One night, the Jap plane came over, followed one of our planes in, and did not set off the alarm. We were all in our cots when we heard a strange sound. The next thing we knew, the Jap plane was dropping bombs.
Okay.
One night, a Jap plane followed our planes in, and it did not set off the alarm. We were all in our cots, and we heard a strange sound. The next thing we knew, he was dropping bombs on us. We all headed for our foxholes. I landed on my stomach, and I knocked a tooth loose and skinned my face. Our tent was torn apart. The bomb was filled with nails. No one was hit, and I said a prayer for my buddies. We had 5 to a tent. The Jap bombed our area all night. No sleep that night. It was Christmas Eve. Ayashima was no picnic. Our next move by LST was to Okinawa. It was the 4th of July, 1945. Ships in our convoy had target practice all day, the 4th. I never heard anything quite like that before. My poor ears took a beating. Okinawa was across from the island where Ernie Pyle, journalist, was killed. We landed, and a Marine captain drove up and said to us, "No worry, we cleared out all the Japs. Sounded good, but our CO ordered 8 of us to go out and patrol the area. The first hut we came across, we found a wounded Jap in the middle of the floor, sitting on the ground. We tried to get him to stand, but no luck. We then grabbed his legs to pull him out, and his bowels let loose. Oh, what a mess. We turned him over to MP, and shortly afterwards, we walked down a hill where we saw a Jap. He started to run, and we all yelled, "Halt!" But he kept going. We opened fire and killed him. Most of our plans and talk were about the invasion of Japan. We were all scared, but we knew we had to go through with it to end the war. What a great decision to drop the atomic bomb. Sure, a lot of Japs were killed, but we would have invaded Japan and could have lost close to 1 million Americans. Later, they sent their envoys by plane, and we got to see them as they changed planes and got on ours to fly to the signing on the ship Missouri. In a few weeks, we got orders to ship out to Japan. All our cooks were older fellows, and they got home for Thanksgiving. We were there to get fresh food, and 3 of us from our tent volunteered to be cooks. The rest of our company didn't like it. We fooled everyone because it turned out pretty good. I was in charge of making coffee. We had a large kettle, and I filled it with water, and a large 6-pound coffee can. I asked how much I should put in. The consensus was that I hold the coffee can over the boiling water, and when the steam burnt my fingers, I would take it down. They decided that would be enough coffee to put in. Points were the main topic we all talked about. Your age and length of service determine how many points you had. In about a month, I had enough so I was eligible to leave. But it still took several weeks before I loaded on a ship called the Long Island, a small aircraft carrier. The morning we left, the ship held general quarters on flight deck. And we were nosy, and we all got up on the flight deck. The captain was speaking to all the sailors. The reason that the 2 sailors who were lookouts on the bow of the ship spotted a mine and alerted the officer in charge. The captain said, "We missed the mine." He awarded each a $25 war bond and a 3-day pass. When we arrived in San Diego, the Lord was surely with us. In a couple of days, we were all on a train and headed for Louisville, Kentucky. My dad worked in Louisville at the time, and they had their work Christmas party on the 22nd. About 9 p.m., Dad came to our barracks looking for me. I was on the 2nd floor. And he yelled at the bottom of the steps, "Junior!" All the soldiers laughed and called me Junior. The next day, I met him, and we rode to Covington on the bus. We had to stand all the way. While we were swaying back and forth, he whispered in my ear, "You better get that girl out of your mind." I said, "Why?" "She is engaged again." He was talking about Loretta. As you know, I did not forget her because we were married June the 8th, 1946. Important dates: I left Japan December 5, arrived in San Diego on December the 18th, arrived in Louisville on December the 21st, my birthday, discharged on December the 23rd, and got home on the night of December the 23rd, 1945. That's my story.
Clarence, in regards to points, you mentioned that you acquired enough points to be rotated back from the service, and age was part of how you figured the points. Could you explain to us how you acquired and what point, how many points you needed for the rotation?
Well, you got points by the length of service. You were in the Army 3 years, I added up so many points. And if you did something like kill an enemy, you got points for that also.
How many points did you need to rotate?
You know, I can't exactly remember. It could have been 100, something in that vicinity.
Okay, all right, thank you. I was wondering too if you had any experiences with the American Red Cross.
Well, I did in a way. I can't exactly remember, but I know that when it was time for me to go home, I went there and practically pleaded with them to include me in the points that they were giving out. And it was a young lady that was very nice, and she told me that with my experience, I had enough points not to worry.
Okay, thank you. What about the USO? Were you privileged to see any of the USO shows, either here in the States or in the theater?
Well, the USO, we all got to go to shows and enjoyed them. They were very good. And I remember being there on several occasions, and I really enjoyed it.
Do you remember any of the stars that might have been there?
Well, Jack Benny was there, Francis Langford,
Yeah.
and there was a couple more, but I can't remember who they were.
And the last question I have, well, thank you very much. The last question I have is, did you see any Kilroy was here signs?
I'm sure I did, but I can't remember.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Do you have any closing remarks? Anything?
Well, I'm sorry I couldn't speak plainer, louder, and such, but it was a little hard. I guess I haven't spoke that much for a long time.
Oh, well, you did a good job. And thank you ever so much for your service to the country and for contributing to this tape of the Veterans History Project. Thank you.
Thank you.